people should take the time to learn about what exists and what work has happened in the past. So, we've certainly seen a huge peak in momentum and interest in defunding police after the police killing of George Floyd in the summer of 2020. And a lot of people are being introduced to the idea of PIC, or prison industrial complex abolition, for the first time. Yet, abolitionist organizing has a rich history. This language, for example, of defunding police comes from decades and decades of that work actually happening. So I say this not just for the sake of stating that work to defund police isn't new, but rather to say that people interested in abolition can look at years and years of work and research and tools and analysis and examples and lessons learned from what people have done. So that way they don't have to be reinventing the wheel. This is a core part of building a movement. You look at what movements have done in the past and use that information to inform how you'll continue building the movement in the future.
So I think I would tell someone to study, to practice, to build concrete skills, and to document. Mainly to study, really to study with others and to study independently. Political education is really important. Practice, meaning that people should join organization or start their own projects. Building concrete skills, very self-explanatory. Learn how to do things and make things and share those generously with your comrades and the world. And then document, keep track of what you're doing, learn from what you've done, reflect. Those would be my suggestions.
As important as it is to have a broad-ranging understanding of what prison industrial complex abolition is, that being able to be specific also allows us then to drill into what components of that are represented in policing, or represented in jails, or represented in prisons, or in mental health institutions, right? How do we understand the relationships between the policing at the border and policing in a city? And these kinds of specific examples, I think, allow us then also to build campaigns, to build coalitions, and allow us to keep in the frame at all times that these things are all intertwined, right? So that every step that we take in imagining what we might make or what we might fight ties to our ability to keep that bigger picture in mind.
We need some combination of theory and practice in order to organize successfully. What that's going to look like is going to depend on you and where you are, what kind of struggles you're involved in. But find the balance, find people you can talk these things over with, do start study groups, and ideally, be in study groups with people who you were also doing organizing with. Because without both sides, we're not going to win.
I have two pieces of advice for anybody who's new to prison industrial complex abolition. The first one is to beware of grifters and people who are brand new, acting like they have all the answers. You will come to answers that are probably more complicated than those people, and I do believe that there are correct answers to some questions. But the answers that you arrive at will be based on good thinking and practice, rather than somebody trying to get you to pay into their Patreon account. So be thoughtful about who you trust and why you trust what they're telling you. The second piece of advice that I would offer is to really give tools, practices, and approaches a very serious attempt, or at least try to get out of them what you're able to before giving up on them or deciding that they are somehow reformist or contradictory to abolitionist politics. There is no single practice, approach, or tool that is in and of itself not abolitionist. You always have to ask yourself, what am I using this in the direction of? What am I trying to get it to do? And toward what ends? How am I using it and toward what ends? And that will help you decide its value. There's nothing inherently good or bad about any individual tool. It's how you put it to work.
One of the things that I've come to find be really important, both through activist work and also as a teacher who teaches people who sometimes wind up getting involved in this work, is to understand ways in which they are already connected to this work, even if they don't feel like they are in their immediate lives. So if one feels like they don't have anything to do with prisons or the prison industrial complex, or they didn't grow up feeling afraid of the police, things like that, I don't think that means that you don't necessarily have a relationship to those things. But that feeling insulated from those things is a very particular relationship.
As we enter this work, we have to immediately demystify the idea that abolition is some kind of outcome, as if it's some kind of end goal, as if it's some final state of being. It is never that. Over the long historical tradition of abolition, its most creative and radical inheritors have never thought about it as an outcome. It is a state of being. It is a form of creativity and community. It's an ongoing method for being in the world, as well as for transforming, reshaping, and disrupting the world. So we don't talk about abolition as an outcome. Abolition is what you do, and that is I think essential if we think about it in the collective sense, right? It is what we do, and if we do that with a deep sense of historical obligation to a certain Black radical tradition that is principal and central to pushing abolition forward in every historical moment, then I think we can actually get somewhere in this moment. I think actually we're obligated to do that.
The struggle is long and there's going to be setbacks. And so you have to find time to study, learn about social movements, learn political analysis. It's been very important to me to learn from my elders and to develop mentors. But also, amongst the people that I'm working with to build shared struggle, right? Learn how to engage in critique, not only about the system, but also around your own thinking. And most of all, be prepared. I think what this moment really shows us is kind of the power of people, conceptualizing, articulating what abolition is and could be, being really clear on what abolitionist goals are, organizing around those ideas and beliefs, building power and kind of narrative work to do it.
I think you have to get out of the United States, and that could mean actually traveling elsewhere in the world. But if that's not possible, it could also be accomplished by closely studying other places. I was thinking about how when I came to abolitionist politics, I had spent several years learning from the Zapatista movement in southern Mexico. And there were so many things about the Zapatista movement itself that were deeply inspirational and that resonated with PIC abolitionism. For example, just the movement's core slogan, "Another world is possible." But equally powerful for me was simply seeing firsthand another way of living, another way of addressing problems, another model of community organization. I feel like in order to do the work of abolition, it's essential to actually believe that another world is possible, and to believe that not only are there alternative ways of addressing harm, but that there are different ways of relating to one another, of organizing ourselves, and of organizing society. Which is not to say that alternative models don't exist within the US, but there's something about getting outside of these borders that allowed my perception of the range of possibilities to really expand.
For me and for the learning and the work that I've done, abolition has always meant what we need to build and make as much as what we need to defund or divest. Yes, it's about defunding the police, but it's also what we want to invest in, what we want to experiment, what we want to try, what we want to build.
I think one thing that would have been useful for me to hear as I entered in abolitionist organizing is to be kind to yourself as you try to unlearn about existing structures of violence, and as you learn about PIC abolition, penal abolition, carceral abolition, to have humility, because frequently what we're engaging with fundamentally are ideas and praxis that is trying to destabilize the status quo, to try and destabilize things that we take for granted, including within ourselves, right? And that can be quite an experience and quite a lot to deal with at times. So like to be open to not being perfect, to being open to learning and building with others, and to be generous with others when they're trying to build you up, even though it might feel like you're being teared down. But I mean, we are fundamentally trying to tear down the existing and rebuild the world anew, and so we have to find ways to accept that process within ourselves happening with humility as we try and build communities, not cages, with other folks.
So my advice is to get involved, to join an organization, to read what's already out there so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, to stay creative and curious. There's a lot that I think has been defined around abolition. So there are times where people will have a "this doesn't exist" moment. And then there's a lot that I think is up to us to co-create. And if there's one thing I think we really need right now, is that we need more folks, particularly Black folks, Indigenous folks, people of color, immigrants, poor folks, formerly incarcerated folks, folks who are inside, queer and trans folks. Like, we need bigger and stronger bases of people who are being deeply impacted by the violence of the criminal legal system to join abolitionist movements. So I would think that one of the most important things is not only how will you deepen your practice, deepen your engagement, but also support others to get more involved in the movement.
When I was first becoming or entering into the abolitionist movement against the prison industrial complex, I think I would have benefited from hearing that abolition is a long-term project and a long-term fight. I think I knew this intrinsically, but didn't really recognize that. So for instance, it was not shocking necessarily, but trying to think about the fact that many of us would not necessarily see the abolition of the PIC in our lifetimes was like a revelation to me. But not only that, but it takes a long time to get wins, and our campaigns are protracted. So sometimes it takes years to win one policy measure, or fights against one kind of policing tactic take a long time. And I think that's hard sometimes because we continue to see, even as the fights are going on, we continue to see the impacts of these measures, and they're so severe, and they really hurt people in our communities. So while we're fighting tooth and nail, our people are continuing to get caught up, our communities are continuing to be harmed, and it's like we have no time to lose, and yet winning takes forever.
situate our abolitionist politics and approaches into a wider set of revolutionary politics. Understanding that overcoming capitalism or white supremacy, or bringing about a revolution in our relationship to ecology or the land, thinking about those things as abolitionist, or having a abolitionist dynamic in their own right, that is transforming the present and ushering in the future through struggle.
This is a long-term and a deep fight that must be fought on multiple fronts with the high level of collective and supple intelligence gathered both from books and not just tweets or one-page summaries of books or articles, gathered from books, from active struggle, and from the best practices of our experience living in, but not entirely of, these systems that are trying to kill us or prevent us from living on our own better terms. There's a staying power that's required here, and when folks sign up, I hope they agree to sign up for the long haul.